In this video, I'm going to tell you what I learned by winning gold at the 2023 Nova Open Capital Palette Painting Competition in Washington, D.C. In 2022, last year, I was at the Nova Open Wargaming Convention in Washington, D.C., technically Northern Virginia. That's why they call it Nova, Northern Virginia, but it's all basically kind of the same sort of area. But I've been to this convention several times in the past, pre-pandemic, and it was just really, really very nice to have it running again finally last year. Last year, also, I hung around with a lot more painters than usual. Not just my normal friends like Vince and Sam and whatnot, but tons of other painters that those guys know as well, right? You know, so there was a lot of like late night hangs and stuff like that, and I was meeting a lot of painters, and there was a lot of painter talk and all that stuff. And towards the end of the convention, I was inspired / pushed into trying to enter, my first ever display piece in a competition. Capital Palette is a very open competition, which is mainly the reason why I like it so much. Basically, there are three divisions. You've got apprentice and journeyman and then master. In most other competitions, you're all thrown together into the same group, even if this is your first rodeo, up against people who've been, painting and entering things into competitions for, 2 decades, 3 decades, whatever. In this one, if you're relatively new to display painting or very new to display painting, and this is like maybe your first competition or you're, nearly your first, then you enter under, the apprentice thing like I did. That way you're kind of going up against other people within your skill level for the most part. Then within each of the divisions, there's of course, different categories like single figure, unit, vehicle, etc., all that kind of stuff. It's a great format, and I really like the competition because of that. So after a little bit more thought and deliberation and a good deal of pushing again, I finally picked a model, a Death Shroud Bodyguard from Games Workshop. I'll explain why I picked that model in a bit, but one reason was because it had a very open pose, right? Arms spread and such. No, not holding a big gun in front of it, which you then either have to keep off while you paint and then put it on later, or you have to try to paint behind it. This is just very, one hand over here, another hand holding the giant scythe over there. It's a lot easier, right? And I figured that since it was an entire year, that I'm going to be giving myself to paint this, it should be super easy, barely an inconvenience. I built it finally in December of 2022 while I was at VinceyCon at Vince's house, along with, Vince, obviously, Sam, Ninjan, Miniac. We were there for the weekend. I ordered a plinth in the beginning of 2023 after kind of test driving a couple of different plinths at Vince's, because he has a lot of plinths. And I kind of figured out, do I want square? Do I want round? What do I want? Finally figured out square, roughly the size, ordered it, showed up quickly. I knew roughly what I wanted to do, even with the base, like what I wanted to put on there. I had the stuff ready to go, everything. All my ducks were in a row, technically. However, life, it gets in the way, right? I was busy with all of the other normal things that I'm generally working on, YouTube, Twitch, our game company, Snarling Badger Studios, and all that kind of stuff, and I just kind of kept putting it off. I needed to get it done by late August, and that was months and months away at this point, right? I'll get to it, it'll be fine. I finally started actually painting it in early August of 2023, less than 30 days from my flight to DC and the convention and the whole deal. Not ideal. But here's what I learned. This is where I learned my first lesson, and I'm going to share it with you. Lesson number 1, you need to have a plan, and that plan can't just be, get display piece done before competition. Like that's not really a plan. That was my plan, and it didn't work really all that well. The piece came out pretty well, right? But it could have been better, and there could have been less stress. I had to squeeze all that painting in on that piece to less than 30 days with a hard deadline, like getting on a plane to DC, and that made, like I said, it quite stressful and made it so that I didn't really enjoy the process very much, which if you were watching me on Twitch and stuff like that, you heard me talk about it, I'm sure. Therefore, what I would tell you to do is to pick a start date and actually start then. Put it in your calendar on your phone or something like that, right? And then maybe set some milestone dates along the way. It needs to be built by this time, needs to be primed by this time, needs to, that kind of stuff. All that planning really will help you to move these things forward and make it a little bit better for yourself. Lesson number 2, paint to your strengths. I picked the model that I picked partially due to its, again, like I said, open pose, as I mentioned previously, but also because it's Nurgle. I've painted a lot of Nurgle stuff in the past for tabletop gaming, and I enjoyed it, and I wasn't, I hope, too bad at it either. I love painting kind of grimy, grungy models, so it worked really well for my paint style. Is there a benefit to maybe pushing yourself and painting outside of your comfort zone? In my situation, that would be a very perfectly clean elfin princess or something like that. Yeah, probably, but I'm honestly not good enough or well practiced enough to do that for a painting competition yet, or potentially even ever. Lesson number 3, tiny details are super important in display painting. This is generally not the case in tabletop style painting, right? I've made a video about that very fact, actually. Pachow. But the judges look very, very closely at your miniatures as they're judging them, much more closely than any opponent would during a game. And places where you may, and honestly should, cut corners to get armies painted for tabletop are places that you need to keenly focus on while display painting. That was one of the hardest things for me, honestly, to learn. Also, all of those little tiny details take a lot longer than you'd think to paint properly, which is something important to know when coming up with your plan, as mentioned before in lesson number 1. Try to guess how long that you think it might take to complete this piece, right? Whatever you're planning on doing for a competition. Then probably triple that amount of time. As you paint more and more of these pieces, you might eventually only have to double that amount of time of your initial guess, right? Eventually, I'll bet you can get very, very good at figuring out exactly how much time a piece will take before you start it, which will help with your planning. But you'll never know for sure, I guess. So always kind of, give yourself some wiggle room and guess higher. Lesson number 4, glazing is easier than blending, at least for me, right? It's slower, certainly. If you've already glazed 10 layers on that one kneecap, why not 10 layers more? That's, it really helps to smooth things out. It's how you get those beautiful creamy transitions and all that kind of stuff between colors and, values. But it does take a really long time. I generally start with a lighter model. When I'm going to paint something, I do a light base coat zenithal over a dark primer, which then gives me all the little tiny shadows and little micro shadows and all little spots, pops out that detail a little bit more. And then I spend most of my time basically darkening everything down from that, light zenithal. I don't seem to glaze in the traditional way either. I use washes thinned down with like medium instead of thinning regular paints. Most people, when they glaze, they will take a regular paint on a wet palette, add some water to it, move it around, add some water to it, move it around, and you kind of do this until you get that thing going, which you're going to need if you want to do a lighter glaze. But if you're darkening everything, then I just use washes, and I'll put a drop of medium in there, and then as I need to get a lighter, kind of more transparent version, I'll throw another drop of medium in there, and I'll just kind of work off of it that way, right? It keeps the transparency kind of where I'm comfortable with it. You can practice your glazing on something non-display first. Well, I got an idea. How about one of your tabletop miniatures? Rather than like working on a specific practice piece, something you find and prime and get ready and then go, I'm going to practice on this. Well, just use a regular model that you were going to paint anyway for tabletop. No one will complain if one of your regular like ground pounding foot soldiers has lovely glazed blends on his greatcoat, Or I guess if you're concerned about that one fancier foot soldier in a group of regular soldiers, right, will look weird and he'll get made fun of by the rest of the guys or whatever, then practice on an HQ unit, Either way, it's better you practice glazing a little bit before you start working on your display piece. And lesson number 5, you might just not be into it. You might give display painting a try, maybe to, again, broaden your horizons, whatever. Not even to like enter in a competition, but just to do it, right? And then you'll find that you really get the bug. You really want to do it a lot more and enter more competitions and do more display pieces and all that kind of stuff. However, you also might give it a try and just find that even after everything's said and done, it's just not for you, and that's fine. I'll be honest, I didn't really enjoy the process of getting this thing, onto the eventual, into the case over there in Washington, D.C. Part of it was, admittedly, because I procrastinated and didn't get started until it was going to be a rush to get it done, and part of it was because honestly, I kept thinking how many tabletop models I could have gotten done and, out onto the table in the same amount of time. And for me, that was kind of a big deal. So then the question becomes, am I a one and done display painter? Do you just get a gold and then go out on a high note? I don't know. If I learn from this event and I follow my own advice, especially the planning part, that's really kind of important, and not waiting until like 30 days before my actual flight to the competition, then maybe I'll do another piece for next year's Capital Palette. I can assure you that the bug has not completely bit me. I don't even know if that's a thing, but at most I might do like one a year again. And if it's for, it would actually just be for the Capital Palette, because that's a great thing run by great people, great judges, great everything. So I could see entering that, but I don't see myself entering Golden Demon or anything else that I can think of off the top of my head. I did have some extra time at the airport during my trip home, kind of waiting for flights and stuff like that. And I did look at some models online while I waited, things that maybe could be done for, display painting. It's hard to say. We'll see, right? No promises. Are you thinking about trying out display painting? Maybe even just to like dip your toe, right? Kind of see what you think. I'll admit it's not for everyone, but if you're interested, you should give it a try. Or have you been, a display painter doing it for quite some time, and do you have some tips of your own? Let us all know. Let us all know down in the comments below. It's always great to share expertise, when we can. And thanks again to the organizers of Nova Open and the Capital Palette. It was a great show, and I'll be back to the show again next year. If you liked this video, please hit the like button. You get tiny fireworks or maybe confetti. It's kind of hard to tell, honestly, at that size, but they're pretty cool to look at. Subscribe if you'd like to see more, and thanks for watching.